Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. Welcome to today's webinar, which is about understanding students' attitudes. So I'll be focusing particularly on PASS today, but also talking about some of our other assessments and how they fit in with PASS. But the main focus will be on understanding students' attitudes. Okay, let's get started. So just to talk to you a little bit about GL education. For those of you who aren't familiar with GL education, our assessments have been used by education, health and psychology professionals for over three decades. I'll get my words out. It's early in the morning. It's not that early in the morning in the UK. I have had a coffee. So we've been around for over 30 years, and we were originally founded by the National Foundation of Education Research, so the NFER, if you're familiar with the NFER. So that's our origin. Our resources are used in over 100 countries worldwide, and we lead literacy, numeracy, and ability testing in the UK. And we've now delivered over 10 million tests to pupils online as well. So that just sets a bit of context about us as an organisation, hopefully. Okay. Sorry for the delay there, just a slight delay with the moving of slides, but you should now see in front of you basically our philosophy really around understanding the pupils in your school. We believe in having a whole pupil view. So thinking more broadly about your learners than just their attainment in, say, maths and English, it's more about understanding the whole pupil. And the way we believe that works most effectively is by using our CAT4 assessment, which is assessing ability and potential of children. So that's not their attainment level, that's not dependent on where they've come from, what curriculum they've studied in the past. This is just based on their potential. What is that child actually capable of achieving? If you have that information, that data, then alongside, if you then have standardized attainment data, and we have our progress test series in maths, English, science from September, or our reading and comprehension assessment, new group reading test. So if you understand the attainment levels of each student, then by putting those two sets of data alongside, you can see that if there's a difference between the ability level of that student and their attainment level. So is there a discrepancy between the two? And then the attitudes part, which we'll see on the right-hand side of the diagram in front of you, is the main focus of today. So perhaps for students where there is a discrepancy between their ability and between their attainment levels, the next best step really is to look at the attitudes of those learners, to start to dig to find the reasons for, is there a learning barrier? What is the reason behind the discrepancy between attainment and ability? But that's not to say that PASS is for just those students who are underachieving. It also highlights many issues within students' attitudes that perhaps you just weren't aware of before. And I'll talk about fragile learners particularly a little bit later on in my presentation. So by understanding the ability and potential, the attainment levels and the attitudes of your learners, those three collections of information and data collected together alongside teacher judgment, hopefully you can see it's fairly transparent just how powerful that can actually be in really understanding the learner and then translating that into, adapting teaching and learning to ensure that each child in your school achieves their full potential. PASS is the only genuine psychometric survey to measure attitudes. So attitudes, as I'm sure you appreciate, it's a difficult area to actually put a standardized data measure on. So you can have gut instincts about students' attitudes, but actually having hard and fast data to prove that historically has been very difficult, but the PASS survey achieves that. Okay. So just setting the context a little bit about attitudes and why attitudes are so important. And I'm sure you appreciate this, anyway, and probably, you have day to day, how important attitudes are within the classroom, within the school, because attitudes are a judgment, and in a school setting, a student's attitudes to learning influences their whole education experience and their attainment levels. So attitudes are absolutely key, and they're formed by and affect how we feel, what we do, and how we think. And that's obviously, adults as well as learners in a school setting. The OECD published a study last year, so 2014, and this is just one extract from that study, which, not surprisingly, shows that countries where students have got a stronger belief in their own abilities perform better in maths. I don't think there's any surprise there, but I just think it's interesting to see that, again, in sort of hard, fast data, that this is proven. There is evidence to support that. And in fact, the OECD states a comprehensive assessment of how well a country is performing in education must therefore look at cognitive, affective, and attitudinal aspects in addition to academic performance. So it's not just about how students are performing academically, it's also about attitudes and many other factors as well. Okay. I'm sure that there are many reasons why you're attending this webinar today. The common drivers for schools who are using the PASS survey or are interested in using the PASS survey in the future are that perhaps you're looking at obstacles that are blocking the path for your pupils. So there may be some students in the school, there's some learning barrier there, but it's sometimes quite difficult to identify what that is, and PASS will support you with that. Perhaps you should have some more emotionally vulnerable students. You want to support them more effectively, but again, it's something that's quite complex, and it can be difficult to find what's going on at the root of the child psychologically, and PASS will support you again in getting to the bottom of any issues that are causing a problem. You may want to measure the impact of intervention activities. So it may be that pastorally there's a number of perhaps new initiatives that you're starting, or you're thinking of starting some new initiatives. And you want to measure to make sure that what you're doing warrants the results you're putting into it and it's working. And again, PASS will help you to do that. And finally, it may be, and I've definitely done this, made assumptions about students' attitudes within my classroom, and then historically from myself, having used PASS data with students in schools when I was teaching, then found that actually some of the attitudes that I assumed were correct, and I'd made that assumption, actually weren't. So it can really help for staff to really challenge assumptions, and to challenge staff assumptions as well about some students' attitudes within the school. So in a nutshell, what is PASS? Well, it's a survey, and it measures pupils' attitudes towards themselves as learners and their school environment. What it's not is a survey about things like the quality of the food in the canteen or the state of the textbooks, let's say. It's about the learners themselves, and it's about their attitudes and how that affects their learning. So it's much more specific. It's a whole school annual online survey, so it's designed to be done every year so that you can see the attitudes improving year on year within your school. It comprises 50 short psychometric statements, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like to the student taking the survey later on. It can help to raise standards of attainment and pupil well-being. It can also help to tackle challenging behaviour as well, because if you can understand more about how that child is thinking about their learning, then obviously that gives you a huge insight to then tackle behaviour and find out what's at the root of that. You can identify attendance issues. Now, you may not have any attendance issues within your school, but actually understanding whether that child wants to be at school. It may be that they come in every single day and they're there, but whether they want to be there or not is a different matter, and PASS will help you to identify that. It'll help you to target and support individuals through tailored intervention programs, so enables you to choose the right intervention for any child where you're concerned about their attitudinal scores. And for any schools listening who are British curriculum schools and have used national curriculum levels in the past and possibly still continue to use them now, if you're reviewing your assessment framework, you're looking to replace national curriculum levels, then PASS can certainly help in supporting your new assessment regime and framework going forward. There's a number of benefits of PASS, and I think I've covered off some of these already, but it can establish your pupils' perceptions of their school in a way that you just can't really uncover any other way. So yes, you can ask students what they think, but of course the way that they respond is affected by many different factors, one of which would be that you're asking them as a teacher. So that immediately changes the dynamic. So to have a survey, which is developed by educational psychologists, it gives the pupil voice. And I know from speaking and visiting a lot of international schools that pupil voice is a very important initiative at the moment, and schools where they feel that pupils don't have sufficient voice are working to implement different initiatives to make sure that that's changed for the future. PASS can help to identify those barriers to learning, as I've talked about, and it can help to establish profiles and understanding of different profiles of students. So from a wellbeing point of view, from an attendance point of view, their behaviour, and fragile learners that I'll talk about a little bit later. It can help to support those emotionally vulnerable young people that you may have in the school, and it can really help with teaching and learning strategies so that they are the most effective that they can be. And of course, you can't observe every lesson in your school, but your pupils do. So by getting this sort of feedback on students' attitudes, it's getting feedback from every student in your school, in every year group, both genders, taking into account lots and lots of different views. More from an operational point of view, this PASS is administered online, so it doesn't require any software that you download for administering the survey. It's internet-based. It's on our TestWise system, which is our assessment platform for delivering online assessments. It covers the ages from 4 all the way through to sixth form students, year 13 or grade 12, and there are different surveys for different not different surveys for different year groups, but different surveys for the younger age group. So for age 4 to 7, it's a reduced down version of the survey with 27 statements, but for the older age group, so above 7, so 8 upwards, it's 50 statements that the students need to complete. From a development point of view, PASS took 6 years to develop. It involved 4 universities, 20 UK local authorities, hundreds of children in the focus groups, and thousands of data sets within the standardised sample. It's used in over 2,000 schools across both the UK and internationally, and that's growing significantly all of the time because it is having that pupil voice, understanding people's attitudes, that link in with attainment is obviously identified as such a critical insight to have from your students. And it's instant reporting, so you don't have to wait for us to report anything back to you. That reporting is within your control. Once you've run the survey, you can close the survey and then you can report straight away. So the data's hot off the press, and then obviously you can look at that data, analyse it, and decide next steps from there. So what's it actually measuring? Because I've talked about those 50 statements, but what comes out at the other end? What are you actually getting data on? Well, there's 9 attitudinal measures which are which form PASS. You can see those on the screen. So from feelings about school to perceived learning capability to confidence in learning. But these terms are actually partly, obviously the origin is educational psychology. It was 2 educational psychologists, as I said, who developed this. So there's some subtleties between the different attitudinal measures. So if I just go through what these actually mean. Okay, so starting at the top, feelings about school. This is about the bricks and mortar around the pupil. Is it a good, safe place to be? Often bullying or discrimination could show here with a student's low score. Factor 2, perceived learning capability. This is more about pupils' recent learning experience. So, has it gone well recently? Are they ready for the next challenge, or has self-confidence taken a bit of a knockback? Factor 3, self-regard as a learner. Now, this is more of a sort of longer-term measure than Factor 2. So, as Factor 2 experiences build up, then a longer-term attitude develops. It's not self-esteem as such, which is much broader. It's self-regard as a learner, so it's specifically focused around the student's learning. Factor 4, preparedness for learning, is more metacognition. So does the student actually feel like they've been taught how to learn? Do they have the tools basically to learn within the school environment? And this can be a link with behaviour. So there's often a correlation between low-level disruptive behaviour within the classroom and a low Factor 4 score. For many of you, you may not have any behaviour issues within the school, but where there is, then that is often the case. Factor 5, attitudes to teachers. A high score indicates feeling that the teacher is interested in them, that they listen to them, that they care. I think it's worth just stating here, there isn't any free field text, so a student can't add in any comments. It's not in any way about any specific teachers. It's generally the students' attitude to teachers across the school and whether they feel they have good relationships, whether they feel like they're being listened to, and so on, as I just said. Factor 6, general work ethic. This is more than just school, so this measures a pupil's motivation to succeed in life generally and not just school. There's often where a child is involved in perhaps a family business in some way, general work ethic score tends to be quite high. And that obviously not always, but there's a definite trend there. Factor 7, confidence in learning. This is about the ability to stick at a challenge and not give up. So resilience. Factor 8, I think is pretty self-explanatory. So as I've said, even if you haven't got any attendance issues in your school, it's very interesting to see whether that child actually wants to be there. And finally, Factor 9, response to curriculum demands, is a pupil's desire to succeed as the way to succeed in life. So gifted and talented students often tend to have a higher score here. You can see in front of you 2 screenshots, and this is the look and feel of the survey. So this is what a student would see when they're completing the survey. It takes around 20 minutes to complete, so 15 to 20 minutes to complete, and they have 50 statements, as I said, for age 8 upwards and 27 for the lower age group. And the statements, I think it's probably quite small for you to see, so I'll just read out some of them. So statement 1, I think carefully about my work. Number 2, I worry about getting my work right. Number 4, I enjoy doing hard schoolwork. Over on the right-hand side, number 17, I'm lonely at school. 19, I behave well in class. So they're fairly simple statements. The reading age is age 7, so it should be accessible to most students. If there is a language barrier, Because this is a survey, not an assessment, so this is understanding people's attitudes, not their understanding in curriculum knowledge, then we have some translations of the statements which are available in a number of languages, around 30 languages. So if that's something that would be of interest, then please just drop us an email afterwards and we can check whether we have the language that you're looking for the past survey. Just before I go on to the reporting, in terms of administering PASS, I used to administer it across large comprehensive schools in the UK, schools that I taught in. And I found that pupils really enjoyed completing it because it was about them. It was about their attitudes. They recognised that they were being asked what they thought. So I used to find that even the most disengaged boy on a Thursday afternoon, year 11 student would still love doing it because it was about them. So it's very interesting observing students taking the survey. From a reporting point of view, as I've said, this is instantaneous reporting. So once all of your students who are taking the survey, and hopefully that's across the whole school, so once all of your students have taken the survey, then you close down the survey and then you can instantaneously report. And there's different levels of reporting, and all levels are available to you. So you don't have to select a certain level of reporting that you want. They're all available, but the reporting fulfills different needs and purposes. So starting at level 1, you can see here you've got the 9 factors that I've talked about. Okay, so on the left-hand side, the feelings about school, and on the right-hand side, response to curriculum demands. You have percentage scores there of the maximum possible score. This is for your whole cohort, so this is totally top level, your whole cohort of everybody in your school that took PASS. You can see the percentage scores. So out of the maximum, what are the scores? And you might be looking at that and thinking, okay, feelings about school, 73.9%. Well, is that good or is that bad? I'm not quite sure. And that's a very good observation if you've made that, because the percentages that you can see there are for tracking year on year. So you want to see year on year that your 9 attitudinal factors, the percentage score is increasing. But I imagine that you would also want to know how your scores in the school compare to our sample of thousands of children, so that you're not just looking at your own school, you're seeing how that is positioned against other schools. And that's where the percentiles come in. Okay, so percentages is just your school. Percentiles at the bottom puts it in more context. So it shows where your scores sit compared to other schools. So that's the level 1 analysis, which is whole cohort profile. So generally senior leadership team would look at that level. Then level 2 analysis, so you can see it starts to drill down. Level 2 analysis, this example here is comparing your boys versus girls data, which I always find really interesting just to see the attitudinal differences. And again, that's something that I'm sure you've got gut instinct on how that would change, but or how that would differ between 2 genders, but that can throw up some surprises as well. There's also analysis by year group as well, which is really key. So you can see the trends across the different year groups. You can see how the attitudes in your year 5 differ to your year 6, or your year 8 differ to your year 10, for example. There's also analysis by nationality as well, and then by year group and gender as well, by nationality and gender, so you can start to identify trends. So this level of reporting is really for identifying trends across those different year groups, genders, and so on. You'll notice that there is colour coding, and the colour coding really is just there to support you in identifying the critical scores that perhaps need more attention straight away than others. So if it's green, it's generally, it's something good, it's something to be celebrated. That's within the 31st to the 100th percentile against the sample. Whereas the red is in the lowest 5% of responses in the sample. So obviously the reds, you would want to take action pretty swiftly and try to understand more what's going on. Ultimately, I've talked through the level 1, level 2 analysis, but ultimately what you're working down to and looking at is the individual student scores, so the attitudinal scores for each student who's taken that survey. And you can see an example of this level 3 analysis here, and you can see how it's colour-coded as well. Now, the reports are produced in PDF format, so you generate the reports and they're in PDF, but they are also available in Excel format, so that you can get the raw data to do any further analysis that you might want to do. And we provide, for that purpose, we provide Excel video tutorials, so things like how to do basic sorting, how to sort multiple columns. So many schools choose to put the students with the most reds at the top of the spreadsheet, for example, so that you can focus in straight away on the students where the scores are lowest. I think that's kind of a natural reaction for human beings, for teachers to do that. It is very important, though, to also focus on what's going really well in your school and the really positive attitudinal factors. So if, for example, response to curriculum demands, you had a significant amount of greens, and that was a really positive attitudinal factor, then I think it is really worthwhile to understand why. So what's going right as well as what's going wrong. In terms of who usually looks at the report and uses the data, I find that this does vary, to be honest, across every school. It tends to PARS can sit in lots of different areas. I think in most international schools it would sit within the senior leadership team. I have come across some schools in the UK and in the past where it may sit with the SENCO, but as a general rule it would sit with the senior leadership team. But having said that, a lot of staff should be involved in looking at PARS data, being aware of the PARS data and what it shows about each student. So from a level 1 analysis, the whole cohort profile, then this would usually sit with the senior management team and the person with the responsibility for PARS. At level 2, so that was more the gender analysis, year group analysis, again, senior management team, but also staff with specific responsibilities such as heads of year, class teachers, heads of subject, and so on. And then the level 3 analysis, again, staff with specific responsibilities, but class teachers as well. So when I think back to teaching and how invaluable it was to understand attitudinally, particularly I always found perceived learning capability, understanding the score of the students in my class for perceived learning capability and just knowing whether they felt able or whether they had a very low opinion of their ability really helped in shaping teaching and learning, and knowing how to get the best out of that student was really invaluable. The first time that you run PARS, let's assume you've run it for the whole school, you've generated the different reports, and so you suddenly have this wealth of information that you haven't had before. And we appreciate that to go through that for the first time, you've got this sea of data and you want to do the best analysis possible. So we provide a workbook for you which will help you to do that. So this is a workbook with lots of open questions in it and observation questions, so that it just structures the analysis for you. So you can use this in conjunction with your reports and pick out certain observations without starting with a blank sheet of paper and working your way through step by step. You may want to do it your own way. There may be some things in our workbook that you think, I'm not quite sure that that's as relevant for me, but it's a pretty comprehensive workbook which you can use just to support with your data analysis in the first year and beyond as well. Now, I talked about fragile learners earlier because I was talking about PASS being used for those students who are clearly underachieving, but it's also very important that PASS is used across the school, not just with students that you are concerned with, because PASS can reveal an awful lot about students. And one category of students that it can help to identify is fragile learners. Now, these are the sorts of students who they've had a good track record of success, haven't had any causes for concern. Possibly they're quite quiet in class, but they just seem to always just get on with things. But then sometimes you might just get a test result back and look at it and think, I thought they've done better than that. That's quite surprising. And sometimes you just don't know what's happening. And PASS can help you to identify those fragile learners. So those students who have self-doubt, maybe they're vulnerable, maybe something's going on at home, maybe something's going on with their peers, and they need more nurturing, they possibly need more protection, they need more understanding, ultimately. And you can identify your students. There's lots of different ways, there's lots of different sets of data within PASS that you can use, but this is a pretty tried and tested way, or just one way of segmenting your students, and this will help to identify those fragile learners. If you plot the perceived learning capability data from PASS against either attainment data, or if you use our CAT4 cognitive ability assessment, then you can plot it against CAT4 data. And essentially you end up with 4 quartiles, and you can segment your students into different categories, and that will then really shape the sort of treatment strategy of those students going forward. So on the left-hand side at the bottom, you have students who have low perceived learning capability and low ability level. Your SEN students would probably sit in that pink box, and there's potential there for improvement, but it needs quite a balanced approach, and it probably needs mentoring so that those students are supported and mentored through to help with their attainment levels and to really give them a boost on their perceived learning capability. In the top left, those students who have a high perceived learning capability but low ability, there's room for improvement there academically, but they're going to need some coaching type approaches to give them that boost. On the top right there, you've got students with high perceived learning capability and high ability. Great, they are a sound bet for delivery in the future. They're able, and they know they're able, and so they should just carry on. And whatever you're doing with those students, continue to do it because it's going well. But then the fragile learners that I've talked about are in that bottom right box. So students who are able and possibly attaining also at a high level. But if you look on the left, they have such low perceived learning capability. And they are the ones that are at higher risk of non-delivery in the future. So they really need more support on self-regard and cognitive mentoring. So they're able, but they don't think that they're able. So there's a lot of nurturing to be done with those students. And, that will increase their resilience, and that should lead to higher attainment in the future as well. The graph that you can see in front of you, the reason that's a different colour is this has been poached from Matthew Savage, who is the Deputy Head Teacher at Bromsgrove International School in Bangkok, who we work closely with. My colleague Andy will talk about some videos at the end of Matthew that have just been put up on our website yesterday, and I would really encourage you to watch those videos and watch Matthew talking about how he uses our data. There's a couple of sections where he talks about past data and how he's using it, and it's fascinating. And this graph is from a presentation that he's run for us many times. And this is basically showing, it's within his school, it's plotting the perceived learning capability of a certain set of students against their CAT4 data, so their ability data. Now, you would expect students to be bunched around the line, and that would mean that the students' perceived learning capability is in line with their ability. So they've got a pretty good idea of how able they are. Ideally, the dots would be above the line, so perhaps their perceived learning capability was just slightly above their ability levels, but that would be a good place to be. But Matthew found the opposite of that, and you can see just how many of his students sit below the line. And in a really extreme example here, just focusing on one example, if you look at the dots at the very bottom right of the graph, you can see that there's a student there with a non-verbal spatial mean, so that's a CAT4 score of 140, I think that's 140 that's there. Now 140 is pretty much the highest score you can get on CAT4. So this is a very, very able student, probably in the top 0.05 or 0.1% of the sample. That student should have high perceived learning capability because they are very, very able. But in the case of this student, if you look across, they are pretty much at zero perceived learning capability. So this is a highly able student, but has absolutely no belief at all in their perceived learning capability. And I'm sure you don't need me to spell out just how much of an impact that will make on the attainment of the student. And in fact, the student has now left the school and did not achieve their full potential. Didn't even achieve part of their full potential, to be honest, because this student's ability had been missed in the school because their perceived learning capability was so low, and it was assumed by teachers as well that the ability level of the student was very low, but in fact it was the highest in the school. So can uncover all sorts of things, and this is just one example of one data set. When you have your report, so you generate your report for all of your students, the next natural step will be to identify those students who you are going to be working with straight away on intervention strategies. So setting up, it could be peer mentoring, it could be extra input on study skills, it could be reading support, it could be tutor mentoring, could be lots of different things. And whatever you put in place, you will want to know that it's working. So for that reason, we provide a standalone survey, which means that after the intervention activities have run with the students, then after easily 10 to 12 weeks is what we'd recommend, you then run a standalone version of the survey with each of those students, and hopefully you will see that the 9 attitudinal scores have improved for that student. Okay, and this is just an example here. This is just an example of what that report looks like, because the standalone survey report looks a little bit different. So this is the graph part, but then you actually have underneath that, you have just the hard scores for the 9 factors. Okay, I'm just going to whiz through these next 4 things. There is also, so as well as the standalone survey, there's also an online intervention system to support you as well. So if you find that you have, let's say, a low perceived learning capability with girls in Year 9, you probably there's a number of things you can do. I'm sure you'll have a wealth of expertise within the school and knowledge of things that could work as effective interventions with those students. So you've got all of the experience that you have in the school. But also, we have an online intervention system which should complement that. So you can feed in the scores that you've got from the past survey, and it will generate a report on the strengths and areas for development, either for the whole school or for individual pupils. and it will suggest development strategies and interventions that you could consider for those students. So it's just better than starting with a blank sheet of paper and having to generate the ideas. We can generate some ideas for you, and then obviously you would layer on that and build on that, and what we suggest as well, based on your experience. These are just some of the examples from that online intervention system. So you can see the sorts of examples it generates. So this was Factor 2 perceived learning capability, reinforce feelings that students have made a real contribution in terms of their learning, develop peer tutoring amongst students, respond positively to student questions. Some of them are kind of going back to basics, but I think it's very useful to have these as suggestions so that this can really be embedded in teaching within the school. Self-regard, so things like ensuring that the setting for praise and acknowledgement is right for the students, setting realistic challenges for students, teaching that mistakes are positive. So this is something that's fed back to me a lot from when I'm working closely with schools in Asia, is a reluctance in some cases for students to speak out unless they know that they're going to get the answer right. So there's often a lot of work around teaching that mistakes are positive and it's fine, you can learn from that. But culturally that can be an issue in certain areas of the world. General work ethic, so suggestions here, ensuring that learners feel they're in control, provide opportunities for choice and decision making, show students that success is important, so kind of modelling, role modelling on that. So lots of suggestions there. Response to curriculum demands, so allowing students choice to use different methods for task organisation and completion. So it's not just one size fits all, they can actually select sometimes different ways to get a task completed. Ensure academic success through differentiation, target setting, positive feedback. So again, a child's feeling really that the teaching experience is personalised to them, that particularly if they're lower ability, that they're not being asked to do tasks which are so stretching that they're demotivational, that it's being pitched at the right level.